Check out my lighting. Welcome to school. Please take the next few minutes to end your conversations and to take out your homework. Good? Everybody's ready? Then let's start. You know that we are doing 8.2 and 8.3 because it is bringing up the issues that are going to create the environment that leads to World War I. And this is a time when Europe kind of thought it had everything figured out. And we're going to look through kind of the thinking of that era and why they were wrong about having everything figured out. I mean, look at us now. We shouldn't blame them. We kind of thought we had everything figured out until a couple months ago. And look where we are now. In our bedrooms, in our pajamas. Well, you are. I'm not. I dressed up for you. So there's often time periods in human history where we think we know everything, and then there's a problem. So 8.2 and 8.3 are the kind of buildup of when people thought they knew a lot more than they did. Nation state also is a big component of this 19th century buildup. So we're going to start with the ideas, the political ideas, and some of them we've dealt with a little bit before. We've dealt with, in the French Revolution, if you remember, the idea of conservative and liberal and radical. In the French Revolution, you'll remember the conservatives wanted monarchy. That is not true about conservatives today, but in the French Revolution, remember, conservative means, part of it means, is liking tradition. And tradition at that time was monarchy. Then you had the liberals. Many of the bourgeoisie in the French Revolution are liberal. And then you have the radical who want drastic change. So these are the political ideologies that are in Europe during the 19th century. And nationalism is growing at the same time. Nationalism is the belief, as the book says, that people's greatest loyalty should not be to a king or to an empire. It should be to a nation of people who share a common culture and history. And then a nation state is a group that has those things, but it also has a government, meaning it has some level of sovereignty. If you look, you should have your books out because you're prepared. I even posted a link to the pages you need. You're welcome. If you look on the chart on page 254, you will see the things that may comprise nationalism and the nation state. You'll see history, a common past. You will see language. You will see territory, nationality, religion, and culture. All of these things help to create a sense of identity within a people. And there are very good things about nationalism. It helps to unite people to overcome adversity, unite people toward the common good. You see it help us, the United States. This sense of nationalism and nation state helped us to see ourselves as independent from British rule. Also, this competition, this idea of competition among the states can have good elements. If you look at how our nation, united in the Cold War against the threat of Russia, that unification came in the form of, think about this. We looked up, humans have looked up since there were humans and seen a shining orb in the sky. And in the 60s, just to stick it to Russia, we said, we're going to put people on that moon. Now, that's not so incredible. I'm sure we could have launched people at the moon. That's possible. The most incredible thing about this is we were able to bring them back alive. That's incredible. So nationalism can sponsor projects like that. But there's also negative results of nationalism, and it often has to do with the celebration of the majority culture to the point that minorities are oppressed. So forced assimilation of minority cultures into a national majority culture, forcing people to stifle, ignore who they are, where they come from, to the point that the majority group even makes fun of, starts teasing people for being different. I'm sure none of you has ever experienced that. It can be painful. And we see the rise of extreme nationalism. Nationalism is used to motivate people toward these nationalistic movements in history that have a connection to fascism. We haven't talked about fascism much yet. We will. But this idea such as Nazism of the motherland first. And once you put your country first, the danger of that is treating everyone else like they are second and third, and going beyond that and considering everyone else to be an enemy. And that becomes very dangerous because we start doing things like, it starts with maybe building a wall to protect the nation state, and then you justify the wall intellectually by saying it's to keep out bad people. And then you start seeing everybody on the other side of the wall as a bad person. And then you start to recognize that people on the other side of the wall look a lot like people inside the wall, and you wonder, should they really be here? And I think you can see where this is going. It's this slow erosion where we start to see people not to celebrate them in their uniqueness, but to identify them as enemies, and that leads to evil. So nationalism, good. Nationalism also bad. So we start to see nationalism, especially as some empires start to erode. We talked about the empires who are declining. We've talked about the Ottomans. We have talked about Austria. We talked about even Russia. They're all vying for territory. And even though many of them are declining in power, that doesn't mean they're not trying to regain some of that power. So the power fluctuates. In this season of fluctuating power, the Greeks start to gain independence, and probably the most powerful European government to oppose some of this revolutionary spirit in the Ottoman Empire. The Greeks start to unify around their shared culture. And if you remember from the beginning of this year, the Greeks do have a shared culture. Western thought, Western ideas, all that we consider Western, we often start the story of the Western intellect with Greek. So the Greeks start to cultivate this memory of Greek culture, and they demand independence. They rebel against the Ottoman Turks. They get a lot of support. Russians feel a connection to the Greek Orthodox Church because the Russian Orthodox Church came from the Greek Orthodox Church. If you remember early missionaries, the Cyrillic language is brought to Russia, and they have their version of the Eastern Orthodox Church. So eventually, also popular support for Greece grows. Powerful European nations come to their aid. The British, the French, Russian fleets join up and destroy the Ottoman fleet. Britain, France, and Russia sign a treaty guaranteeing the independent kingdom of Greece. So there's fighting, but we have Greece. We now have a country in the Balkans. Continuing along, other countries are seeing what happened in Greece. Nationalism breaks out in other territories. Maybe you'll remember in the Belgian city of Brussels, the Belgians declared their independence from Dutch control. You'll possibly remember that the story of Belgium is a little bit complicated because they've been through the Spanish rule, the French rule, and also the Dutch rule, so much so that they have their own identity. And what is nationalism? Nationalism is the shared culture, history, identity, and they have a unique one. So they start to see themselves as different from the rest of Europe, especially, or even the Dutch. Some revolutions fail to unite people. In Vienna, on 255, I do go in order, remember that. In 255, on page 255, we look at some revolutions that failed to unite. You have an ethnic uprising throughout Europe. An unruly mob in Vienna clashes with the police. Metternich, you remember Metternich? Prince Metternich. He is the one who helps to unite Europe after. Anyone? Anyone? No? He helps to unite Europe after the whole Napoleon kerfuffle. In Budapest, nationalist leader Louis Kassouf calls for parliament and self-government. Radicals are changing France. We have the Third Republic. After a reign of almost 18 years, Louis Philippe fell from popular favor, and a Paris mob overturns the monarchy. You'll remember the last Paris mob. Remember the fishmonger women who took over Versailles? They have a history there. I wouldn't want to be a French monarch around Parisians if I was a terrible one. They have a history of having intolerance toward bad leadership. So they eventually draw up a modern or a moderate constitution that calls for parliament. So again, we see another factor in the 19th century is this separation from monarchy and the development of parliament. And remember that with parliament, you have a few things that are important. You have representation. You have usually people in control of the law. Way long ago, you had the monarch, and below the monarch, you had law. The monarch was in charge of the law. As parliament exists, they start to write the law that then suppresses the monarch. And this is part of this modern push, this liberal push of the people to suppress monarchy or at least hold monarchy accountable. In Russia, you have more reforms. Russia has had a lot of challenges because their reforms are different than the West. They still are dealing with serfdom. Remember, the serfs, the workers, are very poor, and Russia never quite breaks the control of the nobility. But with only a few people in the country having wealth, this is severe income inequality. Only a few people have the wealth. It prevents the economy from advancing. And the nobles, remember, nobles have wealth and nobles have power. And what is rule one of human beings? Say it out loud. You're at home. Just go out to the door and just shout it, and then never explain it to anyone living in your house. You'll say, to protect their wealth and their power. Very good. And serfs are part of their wealth, and they don't want to give that up. So the czars don't really want to free the serfs, even though the czars understand that as long as Russia has the strong noble class, the economy, the country is not going to be able to compete or become as modern as the rest of or at least Western Europe. Eventually, Russia's lack of development becomes so obvious to the Russians and the whole world. Tsar Nicholas I in 1853 threatens to take over part of the Ottoman Empire and the Crimean War. You'll remember the Crimean War. because it continued, and eventually Putin won the Crimean War. You remember that. So when this history book was written, we all thought Russia lost. But if you consider that war to be an ongoing effort by the Russian people to control the peninsula of Crimea, this book is out of date, and Russia now does that. But you'll remember that originally Russia lost. Remember? Crimea River, because Russia lost the Crimean War. This is a great loss for Russia. But then Nicholas's son, Alexander II, decides to move Russia toward modernization. His thinking is, hey, we lost the Crimean War. Clearly, we're not as modern as other countries. We're not able to compete because we just had a war and we lost the war. As a side note, isn't it great that we now have like international games like the Olympics and World Cup, because we can prove ourselves through sports and we don't have to use bullets. So after this war, the Crimean War, Alexander II decides to move Russia toward modernization and social change. And you know social change. Everyone's super excited about social change. We're going to change socially. So the first and boldest of Alexander's reforms was a decree freeing the serfs. The serfs are finally free. You remember they were free for a little bit. What was it? I think it was Joseph I, but I forget. And if I learn how to edit tape easily, I'll edit this out, but there's no chance I will, so we'll just accept that I don't know everything. So we have Alexander freeing the serfs. Think about it. If you are a wealthy noble in Russia, your wealth is dependent on the serfs, and now they are free. But what are you going to do with the serfs who were bound to land and had to work for the nobles? Now they're free. It's not like they can... What are they going to do? So Alexander comes up with a plan here. The peasant communities, rather than individual peasants, receive about half of the farmland in the country. Nobles keep the other half. The government pays the nobles for the land, but here's the rub. The peasants get the land, but the agreement is they have to pay the government back. Over time, they have 49 years to pay the government for the land. So while the serfs were legally free, they're still racked with huge amounts of debt. And debt has been used as a way to compel behavior. We've seen debt slavery throughout history. It's a way often to control the poor. So while the serfs are free, they're no longer serfs. We can call them peasant, because that's a step up. Maybe. We have political and social reform grinds to a halt, because after all of this great step forward where the serfs moved to peasant, I guess it's not up, it's over, and they're still racked with debt, Alexander II is assassinated. And Alexander III tightens Tsar's control of the country. Alexander III and his ministers encourage industrial development. So we still have progress, but it's not coming from the people. The progress is the state, and the state remains very powerful, authoritarian. And the state is essentially trying to appease the nobles and appease the peasants and create a country that has enough industry to be able to battle the West. How will that work out? We'll see when we get to World War I. So that's 8.2. I'm going to stop the video here. I'm going to do another video on 8.3, but I have been told that the attention span of the common person is far less than I am good at talking, because I talk too much. So we'll stop it there. You can go, I don't know, drink some water, play a video game, and then you can come back and see me talk again. Take care.